we are talking about the morality of vegetarianism, right? So assume for a second that we were able to, let's say, take care of humans first. You would agree that humans would be the first thing, the first species we should take care of. Is that correct?
No, I think all conscious things have pretty much equal value. I think that we pragmatically choose humans because we are humans and we're selfish, but I don't think it's morally more important to take care of humans. I think all conscious things have value.
So right now, if we had, let's say, a packet, okay, we had 100 starving dogs, and we had 100 starving people, and we had a pallet of food. Where would you say that, in your worldview, that should be distributed that way?
Again, I'd say the dogs would choose the dogs and the humans would choose the humans. Everyone's selfish, but there isn't like it's not more moral to save 100 conscious beings than another 100 conscious beings. Like if you were aliens and you were going to pick humans or dogs, there's lots of factors you would choose. Are they bad humans? Maybe you don't like humans. Maybe humans are destroying the planet. Let the humans die. The dogs are more nice. Save the dogs. So there's lots of different factors that would choose. That's not, humans don't have any inherent more value than other conscious agents.
I have to say I am more likely to lean towards the dogs.
Well, don't come to South Korea. I'll tell you that. We eat
Great.
dog here. But okay. So, all right. So there's a lot of animals that are suffering, and there's a lot of animals who are endangered right now, right? And the vast majority of animals who have existed have gone extinct. Okay. So, it's in your hypothetical situation. Like, we have to have a starting point, right? Where do we start if we're trying to create everything to be vegan and vegetarian? Like, what's the starting? I don't get, like, where do we start from there?
I don't know what you mean.
Okay, so we stop.
So
I get that, right? I get that.
yes.
But then, as Darrington is pointing out, okay, what do we? Okay, so we have the animals that we have. Let's say we have 100 cows. Okay, obviously you're saying we should keep those cows alive, correct?
Right. So if we were moral beings, then what we would do is we would take care of all the animals.
Right. Okay.
Instead of just killing them all. Obviously, we're not going to, and we don't have the resources to do that. We're going to kill them and be immoral. And that's also bad.
Right. Okay. So I'm just trying to understand this, in your way of thinking. Like, should we then not gradually allow them to die of natural causes and kill themselves off? That way we would eliminate their overall suffering in the long run.
Yeah, we should take care of them until they live their natural lives and nature kills them. Yes.
And then,
if we could.
And then you could feed those to, like, the animals that, like, the lions and the tigers who need to eat. You know, I actually like watching the Nature Channel, and so seeing the animals hunt on there is pretty interesting. But as you said, when you see them in captivity, sometimes they just slice up the animals, and feed them that way. So maybe that would make more sense. Like, you wait for them to die of natural causes, and then you feed them to the lions and tigers.
Yes, that would be less immoral than just killing them.
Okay, and so
let's take that to an edge case, because like, so you say that consciousness is just something that you have or you don't have. Right? There's no gradient. It's a cow is just as conscious as a dog, is just as conscious as a human.
No, like having consciousness, either you have consciousness or you don't have consciousness, but there is definitely a gradient of consciousness.
So eating something that has consciousness, killing it in order to sustain ourselves, is an immoral act.
Well, killing the consciousness is.
Killing the
why
consciousness
doesn't really make much of a difference.
So where do you draw the line between what's conscious and what's not conscious? How do you define?
Best guess based off of brains and induction.
So like a plant or a fungus or...
Yeah, we have no reason to think they're conscious, so I put them in the non-conscious things as far as I'm aware.
What is a piece of evidence that would indicate that something is conscious to you?
I'd leave that up to the scientists to try and figure that one out. I have no idea.
Okay, so you're just saying because it kind of feels like we're making up this word called consciousness. We're arbitrarily assigning it to things based off of our sort of perspective of the world, right? If it does cute, funny things, we like it. You know, like we don't eat chipmunks. We like to save cows because they kind of resemble us. But when we get down to like, you know, crabs and lobsters, we don't really care so much. We're happy to boil them alive. And then when we get to carrots, we're like, who cares, right? Throw it in the blender. And I guess my question is what makes the lobster more than the carrot and the cow more than the lobster?
It has a brain and consciousness.
As we understand it.
Yeah, so if the carrot had consciousness, it would be immoral to kill the carrot too. And so anything that has consciousness, it's immoral to kill. We just don't have any reason to believe the carrot is conscious. It might.
Even if the ultimate response to that is either sustaining ourselves or maintaining the life of something else.
What? So it's always immoral to kill any consciousness for any reason ever. Doesn't matter.
Okay.
If it's to sustain yourself, it's a justified immoral action because you're doing it to preserve yourself, but it's still immoral. It's always going to be immoral.
Because it kind of feels like the way we're defining this is if you have any constraint on a system at all, you're always going to be immoral. There's no...
Yeah, if there's an unconsensual constraint, it's immoral.
Yeah, there's no progress that could be made.
There's progress that's made all the time that makes no sense.
Well, like, how so? Because, like, we're always going to have to sustain ourselves on something else.
Star Trek would be an obvious example where they can just print food.
Or just vegetarianism, right?
You have vegetarianism, veganism. As we gain more technology, we remove our limitations.
Unless our technology and our science finds out that carrots have consciousness, and then we're fucked.
No, because even then we can just print non-conscious food with Star Trek. So knowing something is immoral doesn't mean you're going to immediately stop doing it. Like obviously we know killing animals is immoral. We didn't stop doing it. I didn't stop
printing
eating meat.
Like you could even take it a step further and say that the replicated food is molecularly indistinguishable from real food, right? And therefore has some, you know, we could find out that has some degree of consciousness. Like
yes, literally
you can follow this rabbit as far as you want without a way
that's
to
kind of just completely dumb. So if
that is kind of dumb.
We know we do define consciousness. Consciousness is quality experience. We have quality experience. That's consciousness. Carrots probably don't. Particles don't. Rocks don't. If you want to think rocks have consciousness, then yes, it would be immoral to impose on rocks too. We don't think that's the case.
But you can't demonstrate. You can't demonstrate qualia, right?
I experience it. Right. We use induction. I don't need to prove that you're conscious.
You can't prove to me that you experience qualia.
I don't need to.
And I can't do the same to you.
I don't need to. It's just induction.
So
I can use induction to conclude you're conscious and then say, okay, as far as I know you're conscious, therefore I should apply morality to you. I don't need to prove it.
But you can use induction to prove a lot of things that aren't real.
Yes,
like
if you don't
God.
Use evidence correctly.
Sorry, Isaiah.
Well, induction doesn't work for God, but like science uses induction. Everything in science is based on induction. Induction works fairly well.
No, science based off of evidence.
Which is induction. So like the sun will rise tomorrow. What is your basis for that? Oh, well, we saw it rise yesterday. And what's the pattern? Oh, it's based on this pattern that we've seen over day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. Let's create a principle that describes that pattern and infer about the future. All science is induction.
No, I can run an experiment. I can describe to you an experiment. If you wait to a certain time tomorrow morning at X hour, a star will rise on your horizon. And most importantly, you can take that experiment and you can run it independently of me, and you can prove me wrong. You can say, no, that's not what happened, right? That's what science is the ability to experimentally prove that your hypothesis is correct, right? Otherwise, we're just guessing at everything. You can hypothesize till the moon comes home. Unless you have an experiment, you have no idea if you're right or not.
Right. So science uses induction. It looks at the past, creates a hypothesis, and then uses the hypothesis to make predictions, which are then confirmed. All of science is induction. It's using past experience and phenomenon to infer things about the future and then seeing if those things happen. So it's all of science is induction.
But that's the most important part, right? Is being able to see if those things happen. You need to be able to experimentally prove.
Right.
If you don't have an experiment that can disprove your theory, you don't have a theory. right?
No, you still have a hypothesis. So theories don't quite work that way. And you don't necessarily need disconfirmation. Falsifiability is one criterion of the philosophy of science. It's not the only one, but novel prediction, yes, that's good.
Right. No, novel prediction, and demonstrable evidence, right? So
Yeah.
if you cannot, let's say I come up with a hypothesis, doesn't really matter what it is, right? The very next thing that I have to do in order for it to be not pseudoscience is say, here is a prediction that I make and an experiment that could be run. And most importantly, if it doesn't turn out the way I say it does, my hypothesis is proven false. Right? That's what an experiment is. It's the ability to prove myself wrong. And so if once you're outside of the realm of being able to demonstrably prove something through experiment, you are now off in Wu land, right?
No,
With
no,
Krishna and
no. So
Jesus.
I won't say it.
hypotheses, all hypotheses are just hypotheses. Like you don't like if you claim it's testable, if you claim I make a prediction, then yes, then there'd be a way to prove it, right? But it's still a hypothesis, like any other scientific hypothesis.
Like I
before
think
it's
you're
testable.
confusing hypothesis with guess, and I think that that's a very,
No,
if you'll excuse my
I'm
expression,
so
sophomoric
you've gotten most of
mistake.
the technological language here wrong. One, falsifiability is not the most important thing. It's just an aspect. You don't need falsifiability to confirm hypotheses. It's not required in science. You do need novel predictions. That's important. The fact that you get them wrong doesn't prove your hypothesis wrong. There's lots of different ways that you could be wrong about the prediction and still have your hypothesis be right.
No, I'm saying that the experiment has to be set up in a way so that it can falsify the prediction. It can falsify the hypothesis, right?
Sure. So, but
So
again, none of that's relevant here. So you don't need predictions when making a hypothesis. You can make a hypothesis of anything you want. That's just fine. A good hypothesis is one that explains the data. There's differences between good hypotheses and bad hypotheses. It's not just testability. Testability
wait,
is
Hold on,
what's the
Jeremy.
difference between a good hypothesis and a bad hypothesis?
explanatory power, explanatory scope, ad hocness. There's lots of different epistemological ways to gauge hypotheses.
That's philosophy. Hang on.
Yes.
So in science, for the record,
The
in
same thing
science,
works in science.
what
So
is the
science
difference
also
between a
does
good
philosophy.
hypothesis and a bad hypothesis?
The exact same things I just listed.
Okay.
So
Epistemology and its sort of alignment with self-consistency. Is that? I mean,
yeah,
obviously it has to be
not having
self-consistent,
a contradiction is also important in
right?
theories.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we found an agreement. Good. Common ground.
Let me change this up here for a second, because what are your thoughts on like crickets or worms or fish
Crickets probably have consciousness. Worms probably have some very small level of consciousness.
and fish as well?
Yes, definitely
Okay,
fish.
let's set aside the meat eating thing just for a quick second, the morality of that specifically, because I think one thing that we could, even if we want to say we're going to eat some kind of meat, like one step would be to be a lot, like an intermediate step would be to be a lot less reliant on meats like beef, for example, because you can get a lot better nutrition from insects, and it takes up a lot less space and has a lot less carbon footprint than beef. So there's like you could do all kinds of stuff with insects.
Sure.
For example, you can make it into like bread. Actually, I was in Thailand once, and they just pull up with these carts, and man, they have roaches and worms and crickets and stuff, and you could just eat them like it's pretty crazy. But a lot of places in the third world, they eat that. So would that be like a kind of like a happy medium to you know to be more reliant on less um, less efficient less efficient meat, for example, like pigs, and because we would need some. It's not like you can't make giant steps overnight, right? You could wind up
Sure.
having some disastrous consequences. I mean, Mao tried to eliminate all of the birds because they were eating the seeds, right? And so they killed all the birds, and then the locusts came in and caused a lot more damage in the long run. So, what would you think about that as like an intermediary step?
Sure, like all progress is intermediary steps. Their
Mm-hmm.
intermediary steps are good.
So would that be? Would you consider eating a cricket like less immoral, or no? It's the same level.
It's still immoral. I don't know. Like if you assess the level of consciousness, you might want to consider killing a cow, more immoral, but I really don't care one way or the other. If it's conscious, it's immoral to kill it. I don't really care if you want to establish a rating
Right.
system.
Right.
So, but obviously we need to take some kind of intermediary steps to try and work our way towards not killing any conscious things
Right.
and making us less dependent on, or something closer to vegetables would make it an easier transition for us.
Right. Right. So here's one. Here's one's going to put your theory into a big loop, right? What the heck do you do about the ocean, man? Because those things are eating each other all over the place. So you would either have to just say that's totally off game, or I mean, I what are you going to do about that? You know?
Yeah, if we had infinite resources, we would essentially stop all animals from killing anything else and just feed them like Star Trek food. So that would be the more moral universe is one where we stop any killing of any conscious thing ever.
No, no, I get that. I get that, but I no, I totally understand the premise. But how would you even conceivably work something out like that? I mean, think about the impossibility of going down to some of the depths of the decent the deepest parts of the ocean. Like that's not even it's not even feasibly uh possible to engage in that kind of. You would need like ridiculous amounts of energy and power. That so it would seem, if I'm just going down your rabbit hole, that would have to be the last step to. That would be like the final frontier, which would be going into the oceans to the deepest parts of the oceans.
Right. So we would need a significant amount of technology that we don't have yet to be able to save every conscious being. Yes, I agree.
Okay.
Well, I think there's a difference between, you know, going out of your way to try to save every conscious being and living your life in a way that you minimize the uh, impact on conscious beings around
Right.
you.
Right. So like
Sounds like you're saying we're kind of just responsible for ourselves mostly.
well, so it's moral to help other beings. It's immoral to hurt other beings. So if you don't
Right.
hurt other beings, you're not being immoral. But if you want to be moral, you would then go the extra step and then try to help
Mm,
other beings.
mm, mm.
I'm still, if I were trying to live my life by this, I would find difficulty with trying to make measurements like, does a certain immoral act become justified because ultimately it creates a world with a greater moral um, value, right? Like, does the ends justify the means?
No. So it wouldn't be justified if it made things more moral, then it would just be moral. It would be justified if it's the least immoral thing you could do in the situation.
Okay, and we're not aggregating morality. We're taking each case as an individual case by case basis, right? So I
Right.
can't
So
say
like,
by putting a bullet in somebody's head, if I go back and kill Hitler, right, and I save millions of people, I've created an immoral act. I've damaged a conscious being. I know
yep.
that the Hitler thing was a terrible
No,
Caesar.
that's a
Right?
perfect fine example. So
Yeah,
yes,
no, it's
killing
Yeah.
baby Hitler would be immoral. You have killed one being and saved 6 million. So you've done 6 million
Right.
moral actions and one immoral action, but that immoral action is still immoral. It doesn't become moral because you've saved lots of other beings.
Right. So we can't just kind of sum up the total and call it, you know, some
greater good.
a total more, yeah, a greater good.
Yeah, so you definitely don't believe in utilitarianism, do you?
No.
Okay. All right. All right. That's at least you're consistent in this. I will say that you're you know
Right. So
and
that would be
also,
like a justified immoral action. So you've done one immoral thing and it's justified, but it's still wrong. It's still immoral.
Right.
And you've done it to accomplish a bunch of good things.
and you wouldn't see the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki as a like literally the calculations is that literally saved millions of Japanese people. And
Nope. I don't like my understanding of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was more a test of the nuclear bombs. It had nothing to do with Russia, as far as I'm aware. U.S. doesn't care about what Russia does. Taking over Japan, it really didn't care. It was more a demonstration of power to the world and to cause the balance of power to shift. It really, I don't think they did it to stop Russia. I don't think Russia had plans to invade Japan, and the nuking that stopped them. I think the nuking it would have actually helped them to invade Japan.
okay,
Like if they actually planned to invade Japan, destroying their infrastructure, making it easier to invade, would probably make it easier for the Russians, not harder.
so what if, okay, so what if you were presented with the facts that literally at least 2 million people were saved, not only Americans but Japanese, more importantly Japanese people. um how would you, how do you not parse that and say that committing one act right now is going to save people starving to death, and being um, prolonging the war and stopping recovery? Because again, as I said, if we just take a look at it, from the lens of history right now, they are, and you go there, that is probably the most advanced technological country I've ever been to, and I've been all over the world. So that act helped them in the long run. So and especially if you
Well,
understand,
like if the options were nuke Japan or everyone in Japan starves to death and doesn't become the modern society, then obviously it would be like killing baby Hitler. It'd be a justified immoral action. But I see no connection between nuking Japan and that being the cause of Japan's prosperity. If we didn't nuke Japan, it would have grown significantly faster and better.
if we didn't nuke them.
We
Yes.
don't know. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. It's like the baby Hitler situation only makes sense if time travel is involved. You couldn't have known when Hitler was an infant that Hitler was going to be Hitler, and you couldn't have predicted the two possible universes that outcome from whether or not he lives or dies. And I think the same thing goes for Japan. Like, we can argue day and night what could have happened. The fact is, so one thing did happen, and therefore we know it has a probability. We have no idea what the outcome of not nuking Hiroshima would be.
Well, we actually do. So we know that
Do.
the effects of nuking societies, we know what a nuke does, and we know what causes societies to grow and flourish. And most of it involves people and economies and giving women education and healthcare, those kinds of things. And so if you destroy those things, we can use induction as a very solid basis to conclude that would have the opposite effect or regress society or make it slower to progress. And so nuking the cities, we can have a very significantly strong basis to say that probably was a detriment to Japanese's growth. And if we didn't do that, they would have grown a lot faster.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm not pro nuclear bombing.
I am pro nukes.
Tom,
I'm just saying that, yeah, while we could make a prediction, because it didn't happen, we don't know what sort of butterfly effect type things would have ultimately turned out. There's a little bit of chaos theory going on there, right? Which is, once you change something, it becomes very, very, very difficult to track with precision what the consequences are. So just want to be careful when we talk about, like, well, what if we didn't do this? What if the EU wasn't formed, or the UN wasn't formed? What if
well,
a lot of things would have changed if things didn't happen exactly the way they did, especially during that time period.
In the case of Japan, you literally had the emperor telling people to jump off cliffs rather than being surrendering to the United States. So by the time the nukes were dropped, you had Germany had already been defeated for several months. Italy was long gone. And what you have is they've calculated how many people were going to die per mile they had to take. and it was I can't think of it at the top of my head right now, but it might have been something like 1,000 people per mile or whatever. So the calculations were, and I mean, this only maybe this might have only been relevant in somewhere like Japan, who thinks we're going to fight you guys to the end, and the samurai culture is, if we get defeated on the battlefield, let's just embowel ourselves, so disembowel ourselves. So I think it's pretty easy to see that this act, if you understand the culture and the overall history of the war, this saved lives in the long run. And I get it if you're going to say that's fine if you say that it's an immoral act that has the overall right positive. It's hard to parse this, but you would agree to that, right?
No, from the history I've learned about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the bombings were superfluous, done after the war was essentially over, and the emperor was essentially already going to surrender without any effects of the bombs. They really didn't accomplish anything in regards to Japan. It was really more a signal to the future wars. That was kind of the point.
All right, fair enough.
I think we weren't. I mean, we weren't there, and I've heard historical accounts that vary. But you're absolutely right. I mean, ultimately, if this is like a real-time strategy video game where there are no actual casualties, it's all pixels. That's totally what you would do, right? You're like, I have a super weapon. I have justification to use it. I'm going to demonstrate to the world not to mess with me and make all the other players reconsider attacking my base.
Yep, that's how war has worked for the human history before strategy games.
Well, I make the video game analogy because it takes morality out of the equation, right?
Sure, I guess.
But that's I agree with you. I think it was a strategic sort of tactic.
I don't think generals consider morality as much as they should, especially like America, who wanted to just blow up all of the Vietnamese buildings, who potentially contained insurgents during the Vietnam War,
Right,
even though they killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. Morality is not a top concern for America.
right. Well, in the Korean War, I shouldn't laugh about that, but they actually they ran out of things to bomb. They like bombed. They're just flying around like, what do we bomb next? Like, we didn't even know. So I don't know.
Yep.
I'm not going to say I'm an expert on this, but study the Korean War, the history, and the Vietnam War. You can understand the slippery slope mentality, as far as if you allow one domino to go off, it could potentially come knocking at your door, very quickly. Because this was like, the United States had an idea of, let's not get involved with wars until this, the isolationism, and then we very quickly saw after that if you're not getting involved, could really come back and bite you in the butt. So this is why I think with the animal issue, I'm fine to solve some of these things, but you got to try to think about things in a logical and reasonable manner with steps, and that's why I was asking about the bugs and what you would do with domesticating animals, and you know plus the tigers and stuff. It seems like so would you not think that it would be necessary then, the meat eating animals who have to survive, basically like separate them, right? Separate them, feed them their meat of the animals that died by age, and then with time, you just got to let them outbreed themselves so that they can't produce children who are gonna need meat. Would you agree with that? Or maybe finding a way to
Once
modify
we have the
genetic.
technology to separate all predators and prey animals, we will also have the technology to make synthetic meat to feed them all. We already can make protein-based synthetic meats that can sustain carnivores already. So if we had the technology to literally separate every predator from prey, we would be able to feed them just fine. We're not even close to that technologically yet.
Okay.
I'm not convinced that synthetic meat isn't conscious. But that might be a different story. Hey, this whole conversation. So I met this guy when I was like 20, and he was a vegan. and he explained it in a way that really resonated with me. He said, "Look, I if I need to survive, I'm going to eat meat. But here in a technologically advanced society, I don't have to in order to survive, and therefore I choose not to because that produces less of the things that I don't want in the world." And I just wanted to throw that out there. I thought ever since we started having the vegetarian vegan conversation, I keep thinking back to that guy, and you know, basically he just put it as like it's just a preference, and it's a preference of choosing one thing that you think will make the world a better place over something that you think maybe won't make the world a better place.
As our technological limitations increase, we start to see certain actions that were once seen as necessary to produce life as no longer necessary, and then it becomes morally obligatory to stop doing them when they're no longer necessary.
Okay. Yeah. I misunderstood that. So thank you for clarifying.
So I want to break this up real quick with some God questions, but if you were shown...
God does not exist.
God does not exist? Okay. So I have a couple questions here. From a scale of 1 to 100, how certain would you say you are about no God existing?
It depends on the God. Like gods with self-contradictions, you can go up to like 100 or 99.9.
Or just a God in general?
Too vague. Like I'd say it's still probably in the 90s because it's most likely you can conclude it's a human imagined concept, and there's no reason to believe it's any more than a human imagined concept. So like everything starts as imaginary until demonstrated otherwise.
Okay, and so if you were shown proof of God, would you believe in him or her or it?
Sure, if you give me proof.
So what would qualify in your world? I think he mentioned the brick thing. If you could say, "Well, pray," and a brick appears every time, would that be proof enough?
Yes, novel testable predictions. So just like any theory in science, if you have a hypothesis and you make novel testable predictions that are confirmed at a reasonable rate, that is evidence of your hypothesis.
Anything else?
If you provide some other method to differentiate imagination from reality, I don't know what that would be, but you'd have to tell me what that is.
What about if you came on the podcast?
If God came on the podcast?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd be convinced just by seeing his image on a podcast. I think I'm going to need a bit more than that. I'm going to be like, okay, if you're God, I want a gold brick right now. I'm going to pray to you, give me a gold brick.
I think I can get him.
Would you say that the overwhelming odds that like you would literally have to say that everybody who's ever thought of a concept of God, because it has quite a range, right? When you look at how many gods, how many pantheons have existed in all the different
Yeah, they're all wrong.
Okay, so I know you say that. I know you think that, but you would have to say that you are right above everyone else. So that like that you don't find that takes a degree of arrogance to say that
Nope.
these other people have claim to have a belief, and they claim to have an experience, and you're just gonna have to take the cumulative case doesn't make any kind of dent in your mind.
That's not a cumulative case. That's a bandwagon. So it's an appeal to ad populum fallacy. So saying the vast majority of people believe something probably means they're wrong. So like every scientific theory has for the past 1,000 years always been wrong. They get better and better over time, but they've all been wrong. So pretty much everything everyone believes about the fundamental nature of reality is wrong. More wrong in the past, but still probably wrong.
Not only that, but someone asked me once, what's the difference between anecdotes and data? And I said, anecdotes are always a little bit different. So every time somebody has an experience with God, it's different than somebody else's. So you can't lump in the Pentecostals and the Protestants and the Catholics and say, well, they all believe in God, therefore there must be something. They don't believe in the same God. They have very different doctrines and very different understandings and interpretations. And I think even down to the individual believer,
Right.
there's a different interpretations.
Mhm.
So
Well, I think that's a part of his argument. So it's like if I said I'm thinking of a number, guess the number, and you had every one of the 7 billion humans that are alive just guess a different number, and he's like, "Well, you're saying every single one of them is wrong? Are you sure? There's
right.
7 billion guesses there. How can they all be wrong?"
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not. That's you're. I think you're kind
Yeah,
of missing the point, Tom. Because I'm just so when I said when you think about how long a light year is, okay, 6 trillion miles, and you take the whole universe. Well, I don't know the observable universe. You see, it's 80 billion light years across, and I told you in the universe in the time frame of a day is 160,000 years in a second. So I gave Darrington this example that you walk into a movie, you have a straw, you look at the corner of the frame, and then you walk out and you're like, that movie sucked, and like you've only seen the very small, slightest bit of the movie, maybe practically nothing. And actually, I just want to ask you: have you ever heard of or read the book, The Invisible Gorilla?
Nope.
So that book shows. You ever seen the picture or they're like the video where they're passing the ball and this gorilla comes out and brings his chest and he walks
give it
off and
away.
like 50% of the people
Yes,
has
the
caught that.
psychological study that's
Yeah,
done to show that you don't notice the gorilla because you're
yeah,
focusing on the
yeah.
ball.
So yeah, so but they made a book out of that. So but it's based on that experiment. But it just goes and shows in there about how faulty our actual memory is and our perceptions are. And so for me,
Yes.
after reading that book and after reading the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, you read that one?
Nope.
So that one and Freakonomics, if you get an opportunity, I really highly suggest you look into those, because those three books, the combination of those, it was like a trinity of reason for me that, hey, I probably don't know nearly as much as what I think I do. It shows in there, for example, how we take memories
So
in our mind.
there's a quote from Thomas Edison: "We only know 1/millionth of 1% of anything," and it's a pretty good quote that expresses that point.
Yeah, well, so I mean, to say that you have a good idea about something that's outside of even what we can observe is a little bit pretentious, I think, to think
Right,
that
but I
we
do
have.
have a very good idea of human imagination. And so all of the different concepts humans have come up with, like a god,
Mhm.
are very well explained as a figment of human imagination. So if you say, "Do unicorns exist?" I can say no. "Do you know everything about the universe?" No, but I do know how your imagination works. And I can very, very highly conclude that that idea of a unicorn is just something made up in your head.
Mhm.
So I don't need to know everything about the universe. I just need to know about the idea itself. Where did it come from? What's its justification? It seems like it's just a figment of human imagination, then I have very good reason to believe it's a figment of human imagination and nothing more.
Okay.
So
See.
I think my part in this, and maybe being raised a Mormon kind of broke me in a lot of ways, because
Hmm.
once you realize that you're in a cult and that the things that you believe are fundamentally lies, it becomes very easy to look to point out other frauds, right?
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
you're just now you're gun shy, so you're looking for it. Um, so like then I go out into the world and I look to find another religion, because I want to believe. And there's a whole bunch of different churches all selling me a different version of the same thing, and nobody can kind of provide anything that lifts them above the rest of the crowd, right? Everybody kind of ultimately has the same story, um, and that's where you end up, in my case, landing on atheism. But um, that's actually the what we don't know, to me, through that lens, is representative of a bigger problem that religion has. And I don't think that that's an argument for God. I think it's actually kind of an argument against God, because
God of the gaps.
what we don't know is so huge that it could just as easily be Azathoth, right?
Or just a feature of nature that we haven't discovered yet.
Or something that our minds just could never contemplate
Mhm.
because of its architecture,
Mhm.
right? Like we just never come up with the idea because it's so out there. Like something someone said it's like bigger than God, right?
Bigger than
So
God.
like,
Interesting.
well,
So
because God in my mind is kind of small. It's defined as a creator deity who, listens to your prayers and cares about you. But you can imagine something slightly bigger, which has almost no care whatsoever about us, that is just the infinite. And the infinite blows your mind, right?
it
Like,
does.
anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
No,
Get
so
off my soapbox.
no, that's great, Darrington. Thank you. I really appreciate that input. The thing is that first of all, I really appreciate your channel, Tom, and I hope you don't mind us featuring your channel on ours. We haven't featured
Sure.
anyone yet, but I think the respect that you have, the logic, the rationality, I'm damn near in admiration of that.
Thanks.
Um, because there's been a lot of stuff that people are either attacking people's either mental health or their intelligence. Say I've suffered from brain damage or something like that, psychosis. Um, People are even talking about when I was interviewed. People were even talking about my facial hair. Like, does that have to do with anything? You know, when I came on your channel. So, but I think you have a very, very respectful platform, and for me, I, I made it very clear not only when you contacted me via email, but also right out the gate. Like, this is not a premise I think I can prove to you. Certainly not to what you are going to be convinced by it. For me, you could have made any argument under the sun for God, and I he actually spoke to me before I became a Christian, a God, and it didn't change my mind one sense of the word, one iota. I became completely convinced that he existed, and I didn't want to give my life to him. So when I had an experience with him, which we actually happened to be on the 7th year anniversary, like that was a life changing. That changed the utter trajectory of my life. So what you would need to be convinced of God, I cannot provide that to you. That's something only a being outside of my understanding totally is going to give that to you. And so I'm very honest in saying there's a lot of these questions. Darrington and I, we throw around some scenarios and we kind of just bang some stuff out. And I thought about renaming this like parallax switch, just seeing things from a different perspective. So Darrington is worth his weight in gold. I hate seeing him all the time on TV on the camera though. He has this beautiful hair, and I'm bald. But so it's kind of hard. It makes me hard to believe in God sometimes. I'm like, I'm the Christian here, and I don't have any hair. But really though, I think just seeing things from a different perspective though is good. It's healthy, and I think that's what you're doing with your channel.
Sure. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So I'm
I
just
know we're running out of time. I did have one last question.
yeah. I just
What would you do to make the world better tomorrow than it is today? What would you suggest to people?
Um, for people in very developed nations, just stop eating meat.
yeah.
Vote Democrat would be better than Republican, slightly, very slightly.
Darrington's a
Don't
Trumpster.
kill
So
people.
Darrington's a Trumpster, a trumpet.
Do not even suggest. I have custom made tailored masks so just to let you know how far away I am from the Trump camp.
The F Trump masks.
They're very special. They let people know exactly what I feel about their right to not wear a mask.
Yeah, I think on the individual level, it's hard to do anything. Like veganism is probably about as good as you can get. They're the moral, the people who are doing the most to make the most moral impact in the world are the ones who like are specifically not eating meat and specifically not harming people. They're up there with the most moral individuals. On a political level, there's lots of things I'd like to change. That's really more where I spend my time thinking about stuff rather than the individual level.
You know what? I will say this: the most practical thing I think we could do for the world is we got to figure out some way to swap people swap people, like study abroad, but just swapping like civilians, because when you get to see things from a different perspective, like I've lived in Asia for 10 years, it just totally changes the way that you think, right? So for me to go back and to interact with people after having been into Palestine and stayed with Muslims and seeing how amazingly humble and hospitable these people were, if you take your average person who like hates Muslims, and you put them in that kind of environment, it's going to take away from that bigotry, because people have bigotry in their hearts whenever they don't know any better, when they're raised in a certain way. And I'm telling you, every reformed Nazi or KKK member I've ever seen on TV has come about because they've met black people who totally blow away their perception that they get from TV or their parents or whatever. And there's a documentary called Accidental Courtesy by Daryl Davis, and what he does, he's a black guy, and he's converted something like 300 odd KKK members, and it just came about because he sat down, he talked to them, he treated them with respect, and
Went to their meetings, went to their
yeah,
weddings.
yeah. I knew when I was a kid, being a Mexican and seeing the KKK members like on Jerry Springer or whatever, I knew that there was no way you could punch hatred out of this guy. Like I knew that back then as a kid, you could not punch this thing away. So understanding where they're coming from, I'm not saying you have to agree with it. That's why we have empathy. You know, this will be the last point I make, is that you just genuinely have to understand where someone's fear, right? Where they have fears about things. Because I can tell you this as an American looking looking in the world, living in Asia, I see it. These people are just, they're way more technologically advanced. They work too hard, and they're just on a different level. Like they're, I swear, just going to China, it just, you'd have to go and see it for yourselves, like with your eyes, how fast they could throw up the bullet trains. And you can understand, like as an American, I understand that like we only have a short amount of time on the top. So I actually genuinely understand the Trumpsters who feel like, hey, we're losing our country. I'm like, I get it. I see it firsthand, and I know that the end is coming for us at the top. And so it doesn't bother me. It doesn't concern me, because I'm not like pro America. I'm pro human. I'm pro. That's why in this whole Palestine thing, I'm neither pro Palestine or pro Israel. I'm pro human. I'm pro both sides. So I don't know. I think we just got to see things from the other people's perspective. I think that's the biggest thing.
I think that's admirable, but kind of unrealistic. I think it's hard to change people's personal opinions and subjective opinions. I'm more interested in solving poverty and hunger. I think that once we bring the world to a high enough level of an education basis, then most of the bigotry will go away that way, because it's the more
Sure.
educated you become, usually the less bigoted you become. And so I think
Sure.
it's more important to fix hunger and poverty than
Sure.
to worry about people's personal biases.
No,
I think we
we
have a
agree there.
power structure problem where one there is a faction that has leveraged the fact that people are uneducated and
Mm-hmm.
that people naturally tend towards tribalism, and they put a lot of stress on the system to make sure that those people continue to propagate. Um, and until we do something about that power structure, we're probably not going to do anything
Yeah.
about the education problem.
Well, you're doing your part, Tom, because you're educating people. You're bashing um, ideas, but not people. Destructive ideas, and you're doing a very good role in that. I think this generation now, who's able to more freely express themselves to other people, it's going to have a lot more hope than the generations that have come before us. The introduction of mass media and mass information is it's a step in the right direction. I mean, of course, there's a million and one different things we could do as people, but it's not going to be any one thing. It's going to be a combination of a lot of different things. A lot of different things we need to do to. It's like riding a bike for one day is not going to help anything. But you have enough people riding bikes throughout the year, like in Japan, and that's going to reduce the carbon footprint. You know, it's as simple as that. So anyway, do you have any last talk? Any last thoughts, Tom?
Thanks for inviting me on. Appreciate the conversation. Thanks for chatting with me, Darrington. Nice to meet you. Love the hair, by the way.
Thank you.
I hate it. I hate the hair.
Tom, what's your channel again?
T-Jump, same as
T-Jump.
my name on the whereby.
Yeah, we'll put your links for everything, and